when the pistons push out, you squash your whole stack together. And this will remain stationary, and the tangs get rotated by the notches in the wheel. Okay? And do they make a clattering noise when you taxi the airplane and tow it up the hangar?
Probably.
It does. It clatters away. Now, what you do have to watch out for is these have little steel reinforcements there, and they do break, and the screws come loose,
Really?
and pieces fly out, and things crack.
And I-
these are replaceable.
I bet you when those steel reinforcements fall off and no one takes care of them, it destroys a wheel.
It will tear up a wheel, yes. And bad things happen when pieces get jammed and cracked and broken off.
Yeah, especially in your brakes.
Yeah, so is this a floating caliper, or is this a floating disc?
It's a floating disc.
Yeah, the discs float back and forth in the slots. And as the brakes, discs, and pads wear, they will actually move to a new position.
Yeah.
So
The
they do
caliper
move.
is rigidly mounted on the hub.
Yes, the caliper is mounted rigidly. I was going to mountedly.
Yes.
Mounted rigidly on
Yes.
the hub. Okay. Now, let's see here. Now, on these brake pistons, there are brake pistons that come out.
Yes.
Why would anybody want to have a phenolic little pad on top of the piston?
Keeps it, yeah.
What good would that do? Why would you put some kind of fabric, kind of like
Fabric-y, plasticky.
Phenolic is the early phenolic was made out of cotton fibers and epoxy.
And Bakelite.
Yeah, and Bakelite is that
Phenolic
early
resin,
thing.
yeah.
And they have about 7 different types. They got a whole bunch of other kinds.
do.
But why would you want to have some kind of non-metallic thing between the piston and your glowing hot red
Transfer.
I would
brake?
think there's possibly
Heat
two
sink.
answers. One, it's a heat barrier to prevent boiling the brake fluid or expanding the pistons too much so they get stuck.
Yeah, what do you say? Know what he's talking about, or you just make it up?
We're making it up, you know,
Yeah.
because that and also is for noise silencing the noise.
It may help the noise, but yeah, you have heat insulators there, and it's to prevent your fluid from boiling.
Yep.
Because when your fluid boils, what happens? Would your pedal go down to the floor maybe?
Yes.
Yep.
Because the
Yeah.
fluid turns into a gas.
And gas is compressible.
Yeah, so boiling your brake fluid
Not good.
was not good. Yes, so you have thermal heat insulators. And I didn't bring it with me, but on the other, the metallic brake linings on the airplanes, like a Beech Baron or something like that, they have a thermal insulator, a phenolic shim between the brake backing plate and under on the pistons. And I'll pull them out. I'm sorry I didn't show those to you guys last week, but we got many more weeks of this class. You'll get it. So the thermal insulators are there to protect the fluid from boiling and to prevent heat transfer. If something's going to be hot, just let it be the disc.
Yeah.
Why boil and burn all the rest of the parts? All right. Now, do you see how this thing has a gap in between there?
Mm-hmm.
And you think a gap would be a good thing?
Well, reducing drag probably.
Yeah.
will be
So doesn't it seem like it'd be a good idea to have them spring back far enough where the discs can rotate freely, and they actually do have a lot of drag. And you look at that. When you lift one of these off the ground and you spin it, it's way higher than any car would ever have. You'd never do that on a car but you would on an airplane. But on a car, you'd never do that because they eat up all your gas mileage. But yeah, you are going to have some type of spring back device. Now this is like one of the hardest things I've had people try to understand. They look at these and they have a hard time figuring them out. So I drew one here. I drew something.
Like it.
And you can see right in here,
There's a screw.
there's a screw.
Hey, look, there's a screw in your drawing too.
Yeah, look at that. Okay. Here, let me.
And does that screw have a lock nut on it?
Yeah, okay, but you see
So
the
it
screw
does-
right here.
With a slot.
There's a screwdriver slot, and there's a nut, and there's a spring type device there. And you see in there, well, it's kind of hard to see. Let's get it close. Come on here. Let me get the light in between. Ooh, look at that. Okay. You see that steel collar right in there?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a split on it.
Oh.
See, there's a little split on that thing?
Yep.
Okay. And guys have the hardest time trying to figure this out. And I explain it, it's so hard to describe in words, but let's see if my picture does it for you.
One picture means 10,000 words.
Okay. And there's like 2% of the population that pictures don't mean a thing to. There are guys out there who can't figure out anything with a picture, they can only handle words.
Very strange.
That's
I
why-
had a student like that. He
That's why
couldn't
the-
understand a picture of anything,
The
he
brain
could
is
only
dead when
understand
eyes
words.
can't see.
And that's the way some people are. Okay, so let's go back to my fine work of art here.
Yes.
Quite nice.
Okay, so what we got, let me center this thing.
There.
Fine work of art, okay. All right. Focus is fine work of art.
Okay.
So the fluid comes in and it actually branches off. The fluid comes around here, it comes in here, and there are passageways drilled from cylinder to cylinder to cylinder to cylinder all the way around to your bleeder port. So they're all interconnected. So when you push fluid in, all pistons move at the same time. So I drew 2 of them here, and there are many more. Okay, so the fluid comes in and it pushes this piston out, and it's attached to a steel plate which pushes on your brake pad and pushes it against the disc. You sandwich and flat squeeze the whole stack together. All right. Now what would happen if I don't have anything here, and all the pistons push it in, but there's nothing there to spring it out? You're gonna have some dragging brakes. You got a lot of pistons on a lot of surface area, and those things are gonna drag so much, they're gonna get hot when you taxi. The thing will probably never get off the ground because it can't get going fast enough. So you need some type of spring back device that will pull the assembly apart so it can spin freely. And what they have here is a steel collar. And this little steel collar has a split in it, and it's a press fit in the aluminum housing. Okay, there is a spring inside it with a screw going through, and that's attached to the pressure plate. And you can adjust this nut to increase or decrease the gap there.
Is it attached to the brake pad, or you got a pressure
Okay.
plate there?
Okay, it is actually attached with a bolt
Yeah.
to the backing plate. So when the pistons push this whole thing against
Oh, okay.
the brake disc, it squeezes them together. Now,
This comes
the
out,
spring in here
retracts.
is what pulls it away. Whatever gap I have set underneath
Yeah.
that washer head is how far the brake pad will move away from the disc. All right, so that makes sense so far,
Yeah.
hopefully. Okay, now what if my brake disc wears and the brake pad wears? Okay, if the pistons push in and take this brake pad and move it even farther, the big head under the nut is gonna grab onto that press fit steel collar.
Pushing.
And pushes it in
And
further.
it will shove it farther in that aluminum housing to a brand new position.
Mm.
When you release, whatever gap you have here, that's how far it's gonna spring away.
So it's just a regular adjusted gap for the brake pads and that, because they're all flopping in there anyways, they don't need.
Yeah,
Right.
so does that make
clever.
sense?
Yeah.
Does it make sense that when it needs to adjust to a new position, this will hit the collar and the collar will get shoved through the aluminum housing?
Further.
But still, whatever gap you have set here is exactly how far it's gonna spring it back and open up the gap.
The whole assembly moves further forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
the whole steel collar that this thing, the spring fits inside here. And when you take them apart today, you're gonna see exactly how they work. Hopefully, this is good enough where you will understand. Because guys look at it and I explain it in words, and after it takes a long time for people to understand. But hopefully this picture does it for you. Do you have any questions?
And the other thing is so there's two pistons right there for the brake pad.
Yeah, these two pistons
Those push on
are
the pad.
pushing against a big plate that the brake pad is mounted on.
Right. So is then, the backing plate, is also attached to the brake pad, right?
Yeah, this steel backing plate is attached to the brake pad. So see how this screw has a big, when it gets pulled back in, it pulls the
Brake
steel
pad.
plate and the brake pad with it.
Oh,
And are
okay.
these brake pads just snapped on, or are they screwed on?
These kind here are, we got a bunch of different types. You have some that are steel plate where they're all bonded together, and you replace the whole thing as an assembly, and you will have others which individual, little pads are replaceable.
Like pucks?
Yeah, so you got all different types. So does that hopefully
Yeah.
put you guys at a point where you can understand? Because you need to understand that, because if you don't, it's just looking at it, it's kind of hard. Now, one thing that we worked on last week with a few people that had the brake check out was this style right here. And this style basically does the same thing, but it does it with in a different manner.
Oh, yeah, it was with that,
Yeah.
tapered nut.
All right.
Glock and
So.
so.
This piston here has a big T on it, and this isn't really drawn that perfect. They could have improved on the drawing to make it clear enough to really understand. So there's, the spring we showed you on that one, the spring is built inside the actual piston. The spring is built inside the piston. So when the piston gets pushed out, this little pin with the lock collar on it, the tapered, tight fit lock collar, is gonna stay right there. And when the piston moves, that spring compresses a certain amount. And whatever adjustment they have built into the piston, and some are adjustable, that's how far, either the piston will come out, and the spring will pull the piston back to free up the disc and allow it to rotate freely. And then what happens when the disc wears and the brake pad wears? The piston moves even farther, but what happens here is it hits its limit of its stop. The spring totally compresses, and when it needs to go farther, it will drag the whole pin in, the friction pin, in a little deeper. And as it wears more, anytime the piston has to move farther, it's gonna pull the pin in to the end with it. And so you could actually use this pin, it's a wear indicator pin. And it also, if you tighten that nut down real tight, it wouldn't move, but they don't make them that strong, But what if some guy left the nut loose there? What if they're all left loose? And you step on the brakes? Would they spring back apart and spin freely?
What do you mean?
Yeah,
I see.
okay, suppose you unscrew these nuts.
Okay,
And you take out that collar that jams and pinches and grips that pin.
yeah,
When you step on the brakes and the piston moves to compress everything more,
well, it's not gonna move back.
would it ever spring backwards if you're not grabbing it by the
No,
end here?
No, because that top nut locks everything in place.
Yeah, it gives it something, it grips it, holds it,
Yeah.
so the spring, can hold
Yeah.
piston back.
Correct.
And open up the gap. I don't know, do the other guys see that? Does it make sense to you? Good, so when you go and look at one out there,
You're gonna get.
when you play with it, take it apart, it'll make more sense.
Yeah.
But there is spring. Like if you just take this and you mount it in a vise and you pull on the piston, it'll have some spring to it. You let it go, it'll spring back. And the spring back is adjusted inside here. So hopefully that makes good sense to you. Well, where do our other guys go? They go for extra long,
Who knows?
Still waiting in
break.
Shaolin.
Well, one guy had car problems, and the tow truck was here to take his car away.
Well,
All right.
The other guy was a touch of driving.
Yeah, all right. Let me see here.
So Lyle